Let's get started. So starting out, I like to block in the overall body shape. It's always best to start with the torso, whether you're drawing a person or an animal, especially with a bird, because they have nice simple shapes for the body. So starting out, you can see I did some ovals and circles to kind of block in the chest and body area. And then I do a nice kind of a sloping S curve for the neck and then a smaller circle for the head. I like to draw the beak last when I'm blocking in the overall shape of the body for a bird before I go in and start darkening up some of those lines. Keep in mind the species of bird you're drawing when you draw the beak and pay close attention to the subtle changes in shape toward the end because some birds have like a nice little hook to the end of their beak and some have like longer pointed beaks. Anyway, once you've blocked in the beak, you can move on. I sketched in this simple shape of some of the feathers that you see along the side and its back, and then here I've drawn an oval to represent the musculature at the top of the leg, and then I'm sketching in the feet and legs. This is a waterfowl, so you'll see it has flat webbed feet, and then that's important to pay attention to is like what type of feet the animal has. And then once you've sketched that in, you'll see now I'm about to use an eraser. This is a kneaded eraser, which is kind of like a more of a rubbery, almost like a Play-Doh feeling eraser, but you can use any type of eraser you have around. And I'm using that to clean up the sketch that I have so far. I like to kind of clean as I go just because it helps me keep things organized in my mind. Once I know the general shape of what I have, I kind of go right into revising the lines and cleaning them up and making them a little bit bolder. I think that's a good way to work, so you guys can try that too. And you can see here now that I have a little more confidence. I know the shape that I want the head to be. I'm going in and making some refinements there and kind of just cleaning things up. And you'll notice that I'm putting a little more pressure when I'm drawing and I'm getting sharper, cleaner lines, adding some detail to the beak, adding the fenestra, the little nostril there, and then do a quick measurement and figure out where its eye is going to sit. And then from there I go ahead and start adding the details and the little subtle changes in texture and surfaces along like the head. If you'll notice, I'm not paying any attention to the details as far as like the pattern of the feathers or anything like that. Don't worry about like the texture of the feathers. If you spend too much time looking at the feathers individually, you'll get confused. What I'm worried about here while I'm drawing is the way the light is affecting the animal that's been photographed. This being an animal that was photographed in sunlight, the light source is above it, so the shadow is on the underside of it. So I'm going to have a nice dark shadow running along the bottom side of its neck and head all the way down to its belly, and then the top part of it, like along the top of its neck and its back, is going to be lighter because that's where the sun was hitting it. And I'm kind of keeping that in mind as well, and that's a good rule of thumb just for any drawing that you do. If you're not sure how to shade it, that's the best way to kind of go about it. And all of those things will make a little more sense as you see more detail added to this bird. So that's really all I'm worried about here is a combination of cleaning up as I go and adding in some shadows. I'm adding a little shading down the lower side of the neck and down to the belly. Another good pointer for when you are doing shading is don't use the tip of your pencil as if you were writing. Try to sketch with the side of the pencil because you'll lay in a smoother, wider pattern of graphite. You'll lay in more tone basically, and it's just a little bit better because it's quicker, it's more efficient, and you get a cleaner look. If you're using the very tip of the pencil or the pen or whatever you're working with, sometimes you'll kind of tear up the paper or you'll get a lot of like bold lines in there, and you don't necessarily want that if you're trying to convey the smoothness of like a volume of feathers. And now I've moved back up to the top, kind of working my way down toward the tail, starting at the beak, obviously. And again, same idea. I'm just laying in some tone, and you'll see I'm making some darker shading patterns, and then I'm adding some simple contrast to kind of show where the upper feathers lay on top of the lower feathers. And again, I'm not drawing every feather. I'm more focused on representing the feathers, meaning that you don't draw every single feather the way they are in reality. You take in all that information and you simplify it and kind of sketch as you go. And that takes a lot of practice. Don't feel bad if, you have a hard time getting the hang of that at first. Everybody has their own ideas as far as like the way to simplify their drawing, and there's no right or wrong way to do that. I am adding a little bit of the pattern that you see on this mallard because it has a dark stripe of its feathers that go right across the eye there. So I've added that because I find that to be an important note and something that's worth keeping in even if you are simplifying. And then I'm cleaning up the beak a little bit more here and adding some sharper lines, adding some detail, but not so much to where I'm getting lost in the details. And then just kind of adding in a little more volume there at the top and along the neck. And you'll see me kind of just work my way down again. I'm going ahead and I'm going to add some sharp contrast over here toward the back. These are the feathers on the wing, the flight feathers, and those are longer, stronger feathers, so you want to kind of put a little more emphasis on those. And it's also important to keep in mind, all of the different features you see on an animal while you're sketching it, because even something like a mallard or any other bird doesn't just have one type of feather. If you look closely, it has many types of feathers that make up all of the feathers on the animal, and all those feathers play their own important role in the way that the animal lives. So keep these things in mind when you're nature journaling and when you're drawing wildlife, because that really is kind of the whole point, is to not only draw and create art, but also to study. And then lastly, I'm adding in the little bit of feathers that make up the tail, and then I'm going in and cleaning up with the eraser. And the nice thing about this type of eraser is you can press very lightly over areas you've drawn, and it'll take away some of the graphite from the pencil, but not all of it. So it's a good way to kind of keep in a subtle tone or a little bit of detail without it being too bold, and you can kind of go back and forth and revise what you've done until you're happy with the result. Here I'm adding in some of the feathers along the side of the animal, and again, I'm really just kind of sketching this in. If you look closely, there isn't very much detail there. It's just some simple strokes made with the side of the pencil lead. I like using mechanical pencils for that reason, but regular pencils that you sharpen work well too. You just have to take breaks to sharpen every once in a while. Now I'm going to make it a point to add in some of those fluffy little down feathers that you see along the bottom side of the animal and toward like its leg there, and then I'm going to go ahead and just clean up the lines that make up the leg and the foot. And I drew this mallard with one foot raised, partly because I just like the way birds look when they're perched on one foot. I think it's pretty cool that they do that, but also to be able to show the viewer, once the drawing is done, a little bit of the differences in texture and shape in the feet, because you're able to see a little bit of the bottom of the foot. And again, this isn't a whole lot of detail. I'm really just drawing the main shape of it and then kind of adding in some shadows and some lines to kind of put a little emphasis on areas of importance. Next, I'm drawing its left foot, which is technically the one that's slightly further away. And a really good way of putting a little more dimension on an animal and emphasizing one part of it being further away than the other is just by shading in the whole area, which you see I did there. Then moving on, adding a little more contrast and shading to the lower side of the neck and the body, just to kind of give it a little more dimension, bring it a little bit more into reality, make it look a little more like it's an object in front of you that has some like dark values and light values. And you'll see here I'm really just sort of refining what I've done. I haven't done a whole lot extra. I like to add a little bit of a subtle shadow, and then don't forget to sign your work.